Greetings to those who watch below. Before we start today's video, I'd like to say a massive thank you to Jess Black Curtain, Wicked Witch, Steffi Ray, Lisa Watts, Lefty Kim, and Go City Shelton for being those who dwell below. An exclusive membership to the channel that I started 6 months ago. I'm very happy to have you all a part of it. If you'd like to join them, make sure to check out the link in the description box below. The end of a year is usually a time for reflection, that maybe the events that we're reflecting back on aren't as good as most years. To remedy this, please enjoy this compilation of my Paranormal Encounters videos. I'll see you at the end. The Thing in the Hallway by Dark Star. This incident took place in 1992 in Orange Cove, a tiny town near Fresno, California. My wife Jen's mother had passed away unexpectedly that September, and we were there from LA to attend the funeral and help out Jen's dad Bob wherever we could. We didn't know that her father would die within a month. As it turned out, we were in a 1-month period between funerals. Jen's parents lived in an old adobe house that her grandparents had built in the 1940s. It was in an orange orchard, and as far as anyone knew, there had never been anything else built on the land before the house was constructed. It had a large, almost square living/dining room, a kitchen on one side, and a hallway opening off the other side. Along this hallway was a window looking out to what had once been a porch, but was now an enclosed laundry room, a bathroom on the left, and 2 bedrooms on the right. There was also a door for a hall closet between the bedroom doors. To get to the bathroom, you had to walk all the way down the hallway past the closet. The hallway had no lights or electrical outlets, and a window at the far end held bits of decorative glass like insulators and jars. At night, it was as if the glass panes of the window had been painted on the outside with black paint. No light came from neighbours or street lights, because there were none. The night after the funeral, we were sitting with Jen's father at the big dining room table. Jen's sister Cynthia was also there. It was hot, and very dark outside and inside the house. The lamps in the dining room weren't very bright, and at some point during the visit I needed to answer the call of nature, so I walked down the dark hallway, heading for the bathroom door I knew was far down on the left-hand wall. When I passed the closet door, the most amazing thing happened to me. For some reason, every hair on my body stood straight up, and I felt what seemed to be a massive charge of static electricity on my chest. There was no reason in the world for it. I had touched and seen nothing in the hallway. It was so strong I could barely breathe. After standing for several seconds in complete shock, I continued on to the bathroom, where I completed my task with great difficulty, as the strange tingling effect was still in full force over my entire body, and was very distracting. I had never felt anything like this in my life, and I have been electrified and shocked by Van de Graaff generators, Tesla coils, capacitors, and magnetos, amongst other electrical gadgets. This was absolutely and completely different. I walked unsteadily back down the hallway, and the effect just stopped dead as I entered the big room. I walked over to my wife, who was in the kitchen, and said, "What the hell is in that hallway?" My wife knew exactly what had happened. I was white as the proverbial sheet, and my hair was still standing on end. She simply said, "Well, I see you've met our ghost." Her sister then exclaimed, "What? You knew about the ghost too?" As it turned out, the sisters had had many of their own experiences with the thing in the hallway, but oddly, had never mentioned it to each other. When other family members who had visited the house over the years were later asked if they had ever noticed anything odd about the hallway, all of them replied that they did not like it, and hated having to go down it in the dark to use the bathroom. The area just in front of the hall closet was singled out as the creepiest area by everyone, and the ghost seemed to stay in that area. It apparently never came out into the living room. Over the next few days, I experimented with what I called the tingler, and found that I would get the hair on end shock effect every time I walked past the closet door, though the effect was much less noticeable in the daytime. It seemed to like to follow me into the bathroom, but it would never follow me into the living room. It wasn't caused by static electricity or exposed electrical wiring. The hallway had no electricity, period. Our best guess was that something had been pinned to the spot years before, perhaps by a murder or something traumatic, and the house was unknowingly built over it. After Bob passed away and the house was empty, the effect became weaker and weaker until it was gone. Because of this, we think that people living in the house might have somehow sustained the tingler, as the house was continuously occupied for many years. Thankfully, I've never had another experience like that after the tingler faded completely away. We visited the people who bought the house a few years later and walked down that hallway, and it was still gone. I still wonder though. The house was built with a wooden floor about a foot above the ground, which I don't think was disturbed in that area by the construction. If someone dug under the old floor where I first encountered the tingler, what might be found buried there? Gives me a tingle just thinking about it. Demonic Entity Outside My Window by Silverio Sanchez. In 2004, on October the 31st, I witnessed a very disturbing image that still haunts me even today, now that I'm 25 years old. I was 9 at the time, and on that day I spent the entire time at home with the whole family watching movies and eating chocolate candy. We never really celebrated Halloween, not because of our beliefs nor the fact that Halloween was such a scary holiday, but rather the fact that my parents never understood the reason why people would waste money on costumes or risking us children getting into an accident. Well, throughout the day, we decided to watch a few films that we had rented in order to spend the night with the family. As a young child, I had a passion for drawing, so I always carried a sketchbook with me wherever I went. That night, as we watched movies, I began to doze off and had the desire to draw rather than watch. Lucky for me, my sketchbook was on my bed in my room. As I walked towards my room, I opened the door and walked in. While the lights were off and my bedroom window was open, I looked to my right to turn the lights on, but as I faced there, I couldn't help notice the disturbing image outside my window. What I saw was the head of a pig, but not an ordinary pig. The flesh seemed to be beaten so badly, the snout ripped apart, the left eye gouged out, and the ears ripped off. The only detail that really stood out was its glowing red eye. As I stood there for a few moments staring, I couldn't move. It was as if I was paralysed. I wanted to walk out the room as quickly as possible, but it's moments like these that fear wins over our actions. Years later, I tried to search for more cases relating to the supernatural, involving the bodiless pig. I never really found any sources relating to my experience, until I heard the case of the Amityville haunting. Long story short, one of the family members who experienced the strange phenomena at the Amityville house also witnessed a pig face outside their window. After all my research and wanting to understand, I finally came to an understanding that some things are best left alone than explained. To this day, paranormal activity has still been active in my house, and me and my family have become used to the phenomena. About a year ago, I ran into the family who lived on our property before my parents purchased the house in 1996. As we talked about the experiences that I and my family had encountered over the years, the father of the family didn't seem so surprised. When I explained about the headless pig apparition, he also talked about his experience witnessing the same pig head outside his window. I understand I was only 9 years old when I witnessed the demonic entity outside my window, which could have all been in my head. But what is the coincidence that the family before us witnessed the exact same image outside their window? Black Mass and Mimic by Solveig. Not long ago, I lived with my boyfriend B. The house was built in the early 80s and, to my knowledge, had none of the typical events that would cause paranormal activities. I've recently moved from the home in which these events took place, and am no longer experiencing them. It was, however, very unnerving when it happened over a period of 4 to 5 years. There was a corner of the basement that always creeped me out. I saw a black mass there on several occasions. It wasn't transparent, but appeared solid and seemed to suck the light from the surrounding area. It did not expand or contract in size. It was sort of like a black storm cloud, somehow captured in a finite space. I also saw this thing move past the upstairs doorways. Always in doorways, right? I got the distinct feeling it was connected to the voices. Not just any voices, but our voices. The first time this happened, I was alone except for Luke, my dog. I was painting in the bedroom at the end of the hall. I heard the door open and close and thought, awesome, Bee's home early. While I put down my paintbrush, Luke went toward the front door, as he usually does when Bee comes home. So I'm walking down the hall and hear Bee say, hi, just as he does. But when I get to the room, no one's there. Just Luke, wagging his tail and looking excited like he does when Bee comes home. Weird. It was several hours before Bee came home at his usual time. Over the next few years, I'd hear Bee's voice on many more occasions when he wasn't there. It sounded exactly like him and said things he would usually say. Usually just single words like hi or hey or even my name. Bee has a very deep, smooth and distinctive voice, and this thing copied it perfectly. Finally, I tell Bee I've heard talking in the house, without mentioning it has a voice. And he says he's heard it too several times. And get this, it sounds just like me. So now I know he won't think I'm crazy, and I share the whole story with him. I find that his experiences are very similar to mine. What sort of thing does this, and why? An encounter with a demonic pig-like entity. I live in the country, just outside of a few medium-sized towns in western Illinois, very close to the Iowa-Illinois border near the Mississippi River. I've had a few paranormal experiences before, ranging from when I was pretty small up until now. Some of my other family members have had some as well. I've told very few of this experience, because I was afraid people would think I was going crazy or lying. But I swear on everything dear to me that this happened on an October day 11 years ago. I was 15 at the time. My grandparents took my best girlfriend Stacy and me to run errands with them one afternoon, and they decided it would be fun to take us to a pumpkin patch since it was so close to Halloween. This pumpkin patch was a few counties northeast of us, I think, and it was a lot of fun. It had hay rides, a corn maze, and a barn where we could get apple cider and other harvest goodies. Of course, it also had a really big pumpkin patch where we could pick our own pumpkins right off the vine. There were quite a few families with young kids there that day. I remember it was really sunny and unseasonably warm for October. Grandma and Grandpa told us we could go off on our own and explore the farm. So Stacy and I made off for the pumpkin patch, which I think took up about 6 acres. I think that's what the sign on the road said anyway. The patch was just huge and sprawling. The patch wasn't laid out in a straight, level field or square, like a lot of them are. There were these little dirt paths, hills, a stream, and small thickets and patches of trees that separated and split up parts of it. It twisted around a corner, behind the woods a little. Stacy and I were having fun walking the length of the pumpkin patch and exploring all the little nooks and crannies of the field, and we finally turned around that corner at the very tail end of the patch, so that we were out of sight of the main farm where my grandparents and all the other customers were. When we went around that bend, we saw that we were facing a pretty dense thicket with lots of trees. We could see that the woods extended up a decent-sized hill, and there was a rocky crevice forming part of that hill. There was water running down the crevice in the form of a small waterfall that emptied into a brook at the bottom and ran into the woods somewhere out of sight. I remember we just stood there in awe because it was really pretty, with the sunlight shimmering in the water and all the red and orange leaves falling all over the place. Stacey got the bright idea to see how far back the brook went from the waterfall. Stacey was always rather bossy, and though I felt like we shouldn't, we went anyway because I didn't want to argue with her. We stepped over the boundary at the end of the pumpkin patch and into the thicket. Almost immediately, after about 10 steps following the stream, we came upon a small brick building. I don't really know what it was for, but it was made of red brick, was pretty low to the ground, and had a squarish hexagon type shape to it. It had a chimney up one side, a door made of metal, and a window on at least 2 sides of it. It was way too small to be a house, even for one person. It reminded me of the little bathroom buildings found in some public parks. And here's where the terrifying thing happened. When Stacey and I walked around the side to inspect it, in the window on the right side of the building, there was a face peering out at us. I know this sounds stupid, but it looked like a pig, with pitch black fur or skin on its face, opaque red eyes, and really long, sharp teeth hanging out of its mouth. The teeth weren't long tusks like a boar's. It didn't have tusks. They were more like human teeth, of all the same length. They were just freakishly long, jutting out of its maw. The expression on its face is what scared me the most. It looked mean, angry, or hostile. It looked like it wanted to hurt us. And it must have been tall, because I could tell it wasn't on all fours like a regular pig would be. To be looking out the window, it had to be standing on, or at least hunching over, like a man, on 2 feet. As soon as Stacey and I set eyes on this creature, she said, "Oh my God," and the thing screamed. It was like the sound a cow makes when it's mad or stressed, but crossed with a human. It wasn't a scared shriek. It was like it wanted to attack. As I said, I got the feeling that it wanted to hurt us, or was angry that we were out there. We both screamed and almost pushed each other over trying to run from that little building. I didn't know if it was behind us or not, but I was in survival mode and didn't look back to check. We finally reached the edge of the pumpkin patch, jumped over the brook, and ran the whole 6 acres to the farm. Once we got to where all the other people were, Stacey just stopped and stood frozen by a vegetable stand and wouldn't move. It was like she was in shock. I went to the open barn where Grandma and Grandpa were talking to the guy who owned the farm. They saw my face and knew something was wrong. Grandma, Grandpa, and the farmer ushered me back behind the barn so the little kids and the families wouldn't hear whatever I had to say. I told them exactly what we'd seen. Grandpa didn't want to believe me and said we'd just spooked ourselves. We went and got Stacey, who was still by the front of the barn looking traumatized. When they were finally able to get her to talk, she told them the exact same thing. Here's the thing. As soon as the farmer realized which little brick building we'd seen, his face went white. It looked like he'd been slapped. Grandpa asked him what was the matter. The farmer whispered something to him, and Grandpa told us to go wait in the car. We did. When Grandpa came back, he looked very shaken. He got in and told Stacey, Grandma and me what the farmer confided to him. The farmer's family had owned the property for almost a century, and back in the 1930s, the farmer's uncle had told them all that he'd seen a demon that looked like a pig in the woods, and that it lived in that little building. The farmer's family didn't believe his uncle, thinking he was just making up stories or was maybe becoming mentally unstable. Then, at the tail end of the 30s, his uncle went missing for about 5 days. Finally, one of the family members found his uncle's dead body in that little building. Not a mark on him, and the coroner couldn't figure out what happened. He had been perfectly healthy in his late teens to early 20s and had no injuries they could find. He'd just dropped dead on the floor of that little brick building for no apparent reason. The farmer also told Grandpa that once in a while he still hears some unidentifiable animal shrieking or howling out in the woods at the edge of the field, but can't identify what kind of animal could make that sound. The farmer's family always reported that sound off and on since his uncle's death. Pictures Turned Face Down by Soup 13. About 5 or 6 years ago, my fiancée and I moved into this teeny tiny little apartment in a town called Sharpsburg, which is a part of the Pittsburgh area. We'd only been living there for about a week when we had our first experience. When I arrived home from work one day, I noticed that the pictures I had placed on top of our entertainment stand were all laying face down. I asked my fiancé why he would do such a thing, and he said that he didn't do it and hadn't noticed the pictures until I mentioned something. He's normally a prankster, so I just assumed that he was messing with me. I put the pictures back in their place and thought nothing of it. Mind you, there were also little trinkets in the same area as the pictures, and they were untouched, so that was even more reassuring that a prank was being pulled on me. The same night, around 6, we were going to his mother's house to do our laundry. We were at her house until about 10 p.m, and on the way home, I said something like, "Wouldn't it be so scary if those pictures were face down again?" I was the first to walk in the apartment, and the entertainment stand was directly in view as soon as you walk in. Yes, the pictures were all face down again. I ran out of there crying and shaking before he could even get in the house. He was in total disbelief until he walked over to where the pictures were and saw them. Nothing around these pictures, like the candles and other little trinkets, were touched. The wind couldn't have done this. A vibration couldn't have done this. Only a person could. Our apartment was double locked while we were gone, and it was on the second floor, so nobody could have broken in. Needless to say, it was an extremely creepy experience. Although I've had many experiences with the supernatural, this was the most straightforward attempt from a ghost that I have ever seen. The pictures remained untouched after this. I told the ghost that he or she needs to leave my stuff alone, and that they no longer live there. But the ghost likes to mess with my food now. I would constantly find food that was in the cupboards thrown into the middle of the kitchen floor. Again, I had to tell this person to leave my food alone. It was almost comical at this point. It seemed that all I had to do was tell them to leave my stuff alone and they would, but would also continue to test me to see what they could and could not have. To this day, my husband claims that he doesn't believe in ghosts, but I think he does. We now live in his deceased grandmother's home, and he sometimes tells me that he sees and hears things. Sat on and Choked by Something Unseen by Lil Peachy Ghost. This experience happened around 5 or 6 years ago. I was in a pretty bad place in my life and struggling with some things, mainly my religion and my love life. The two didn't mesh well, and I was stuck between wanting to be a perfect disciple, if you will, and the need to be completely and utterly myself. I left my religion and came out of the closet some years later. Anyway, around early evening when the sun was just starting to dip down below the horizon, I had a weird sensation of being sat on and held down while I was propped up in bed reading. The pressure was incredibly heavy on my chest, and I began to feel anxious and got a horrible sense of dread, like something bad was going to happen or was currently happening. I then felt the sensation of being choked. I know through this whole experience that I wasn't dreaming, and I wasn't having sleep paralysis, because I was awake and aware the entire time, and I was able to move my arm to be able to call a friend to pray over with me. I didn't know what else to do, and it seemed to do the trick. As soon as my friend began praying, I felt whatever it was physically snap away from me very quickly and flee. The energy in the room lifted, and it seemed as though the room became brighter. I was obviously quite shaken up, and had to leave the house for a while. At that time of day there wasn't very many places to go, so I chilled out in my backyard until it got too cold, and then slept on the sofa with the light and TV turned on. It's the only negative experience I've ever had in this house, and the only time I've ever feared for my life. Could this have been something to do with my own feelings, and could I have called to, or unintentionally manifested this thing myself? Demon, or my unconsciousness? The Piano Plays On by Kavan. There is a small town near Dora that's called Old Dora, mainly because back in the day it was the place to be, complete with stores, a library, a Methodist church, and even a train station. Over the years though, people began to build buildings farther away from it, and eventually it became run down and abandoned. Over the course of the last 30 years, buildings have been torn down, if they haven't already collapsed, and only a handful of places remain, including the Methodist church, train station, library, and the old furniture store. The concrete wall supporting the railroad tracks is now a giant mural, covered in spray-painted artwork from years past and years present. Even me and my friends who claim Old Dora for ourselves have left our mark there. Most of the time we go up there at night and go into some of the old buildings, try and make contact with spirits who either visited or worked there. Well, the church had always been locked, and there was no way to possibly get in without breaking in. I wasn't about to break into a church. One night, we and my friends were doing our usual rounds, and that's when we noticed the door was standing open at the bottom floor. I looked at my watch. It was 11:37 p.m, and everyone was talking about finally getting to go inside the church. I felt a little bad about going in. It was just some weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. But eventually we walked inside. A bunch of debris lay scattered everywhere, and the bottom floor was huge. I walked around a little bit and noticed an old piano leaned against the back wall. I played a short tune on it. Then my friend noticed the stairs going up to the top floor. I walked over to the group, consisting of 4 people including myself, and we started to go up the rounding stairs. Suddenly, from up there, another piano began to play, and play well. But we freaked out and got out of there. The next night we decided to go back. We thought maybe someone had broken in, and when they heard us down there they tried to scare us away. So we walked back to the church, the clock nearing midnight. The door was now closed. We walked over and tried it, and found it was unlocked. So we walked inside and started back toward the steps. We stopped there for a moment and gazed up at them, twisting upwards so that you couldn't see what was up there. My friend walked over to the other piano that was near the back wall and played a short tune. He stopped and we listened for a moment. Nothing happened, so we decided to go on up. We got to where the stairs twist, and then soft piano music began to play. 2 of my friends ran back down, but me and Sean continued on. We found the piano. It was a large black grand piano, sitting against the wall nearest the stairs. No one was there. I stared down in horror to see the keys being pressed down by invisible hands. Me and Sean left when we saw that. We stopped out on the street, and the piano music echoed out onto it as we began to walk away. Until this day, we can't explain what was going on, but sometimes, when you walk up by Old Dora around midnight, you can hear soft piano music coming from the old church. Slapped by an Unseen Hand by Regine. Around 2 weeks ago, I was in bed at night after texting some of my friends. I put my phone aside and closed my eyes to try and fall asleep. I'm laying in bed on my stomach, fully awake and aware of everything around me. It's just that my eyes are closed. When out of nowhere, I get a hard slap on the back of my leg on my calf muscle. Thinking that perhaps it was my mother who had done it in a maybe joking sort of way, the stinging sensation of the slap remained on my leg for around 2 minutes. I know for a fact that I wasn't dreaming, and I do remember even hearing the slapping sound as well. I was fully awake when it happened, as I take a while before I actually fall asleep. The next day, I told my mother what had happened to me the previous night, and she advised me that the same thing had happened to her just days before, and that I must not put any attention into it. My mother believes that if you keep thinking about stuff like that, you are inviting it into your personal space and your life. The night after the slap incident, I had this terrible dream that something came through my bedroom window and tried to make me go with it, and when I refused, it got angry and started grabbing onto me. This evil entity felt like a female. I'm not sure why I felt like it did, but I remember praying and asking for protection, and that thing, or whatever it was telling me that my prayers wouldn't help, at which point I got angry and started punching it. But it was such an intense dream that I woke up with a shock and my fists clenched. Black Hand by Jeannie. Years ago, for Christmas, I had asked Santa Claus for a pair of little girl high-heel shoes. They were all the rage. I remember daydreaming about how wonderful it would be to have such shoes. I'd look so great and it'd be so much fun. I was so excited and couldn't wait for Christmas. Finally, Christmas Eve rolled round. That night I could hardly sleep, but I knew I had to, or Santa wouldn't come to our house. Morning came at last. I jumped out of bed and ran to our Christmas tree. Santa bought me the most beautiful pink plastic high heels anyone had ever seen. I put them on my feet and started parading around the room. I was so happy. My mum had gone to the kitchen to start breakfast. I decided to walk to the kitchen so my mum could bask in the loveliness of my shoes. Just as I get to the doorway, I notice this black arm that comes out of the door frame. I am walking very fast, so I can't really stop, and I walk straight through the black arm that was stretched out across the doorway. I'm so scared that I stumble and fall, breaking the heel of one of my new shoes. I'm terrified and crying. I cry not just because I've broken my shoes, but what was the thing I had just seen? I tell my mum about it, but she had no idea what to say. The horrific experience faded away with the years, and several Christmases come and go. But what's even stranger is that I see this black arm once more. This time I'm about 12 years old. My brother, sister and I are laying on our blanket under a lovely shade tree. We're discussing God and I'm preaching my little heart out. All of a sudden, the black arm reaches up from the ground and comes around me. I scream and get away from it quickly. I tell my mother of the black arm. She says a prayer with me and calms me down. That night, and several nights afterwards, I slept with my sister. These two incidents happened to me years ago, but I remember them as if they happened yesterday. I don't know what this was, or if anyone else has ever seen this black arm. All I know is that it happened to me. They Hear Us by Lil Ditchy Mama. I grew up in a house that constantly had strange occurrences. There was this one time my sister and I experienced something I still think about on a regular basis. I have no idea what things came in the middle of the night, but this was experienced by two people, and also the aftermath by our mother. First, my sister was about 16 or 17, and I was about 13 years old. My mother had a fiancé that worked graveyard and would come home after work, sometimes early in the morning. Also, Jim, her fiancé, had an incredibly deep voice. Our house was 3 levels. My sister and I had rooms on the top floor, and our rooms were directly across from each other, with the stairs landing in between. Our mother's room was in the finished basement. Underneath my bedroom was the living room. I woke to the sound of Jim's deep voice in the middle of the night. The voice and conversation were coming from the living room beneath me. I thought to myself, oh, that's just Jim. My sister and I always slept with our doors open, so I could run to my sister's room to sleep on her floor when the weird stuff happened. I started to drift back off to sleep, when something in my brain fully woke up, and thought that it sounded different than Jim. I started listening, and while I couldn't make out what it was saying, I knew it wasn't him and my mother talking. I was stuck to my bed, complete fear. Fear causing me not to be able to breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't make sense of what was happening. The only thing I knew is I had to get up and get to my sister. I climbed out of bed and tiptoed as fast as I could to my sister. My sister Rachel was sleeping. I shook her gently, and as she opened her eyes, I put my hand to my mouth for a signal to be quiet. I got down to her ear, and all I said was, "Listen." We were in silence, while these things were having a conversation, so close, just down a set of stairs from us. Both of us never heard the second one, but we knew it was there. Rachel just looked at me, and in a normal voice said, "It's just Jim." I remember shaking my head and pleading with her to just be quiet and listen. Her eyes got wide, body motionless, and I knew she had the same realization that I did. It wasn't Jim. Rachel and I got up and got as close to the stairs as we could without being seen by whatever was at the bottom of the stairs in the living room. We were holding hands, gripping each other. We stood there for a few moments with complete dread and fear and adrenaline, bodies so heavy that it felt like I couldn't breathe. I was too scared to do anything. My sister whispered to me something, and at the exact time she finished, we both heard, "They hear us." This sound was so deep it felt like it reverberated in my soul, and was so frightening it felt like the air was being sucked from everything, trying to suck us in. And then, what sounded like a flock of 100 seagulls, all taking off at the same time, blasted throughout the living room. This lasted just a second or two, and then they were gone. All was silent. Rachel and I looked at each other and knew what we were going to do: run for our mother in the basement. We ran down the stairs. I could feel those things on my back. Never in my life have my feet flown so fast down 2 flights of stairs. But we got to our mother. Our mother was asleep. There was no Jim. We told her what just happened. She said we were silly and to get into bed with her. We asked her later in life about it, and she said something like, "Yeah, I remember the two of you scaring the shit out of me. I thought you were playing a joke on me." Rachel and I have spoken twice in adulthood about this. The first was just to confirm that that shit really happened the way I remembered it. The second time was when I told my husband, and he didn't believe me. We called her, and I told her to tell the "they hear us" story. I drew out the "they" and "us" because the sounds were so distinctly drawn out. The voice was so deep and menacing, and the conversation those things were having was so casual. The sound of the voice and the loud, almost deafening sound of the flock of birds taking off has been in my thoughts for almost 25 years now. It watches them every day from the upstairs window, by Virulent Peach. On one of the main residential streets in my town, there's a burnt-out home which suffered from a fire in June of 2019, which consisted of 3 stacked apartment units, 1 on each floor. No one knows how the fire started, but the home is beyond repair and likely to be torn down in the next year. The fire was so bad that it nearly caught the neighbouring building on fire. Thankfully, no one died, but it left 3 families temporarily homeless. The front of the building is entirely burnt, with all windows boarded up, and the roof is completely burnt through in the front of the building. The back of the building consists of 3 stacked decks overlooking a small parking lot and baseball field, and from the back of the building you can't tell that there was a fire, as it remains relatively intact. According to town records, the building dates to 1900. I've been inside the building one time, when I was at university. The students renting the bottom floor and the basement hosted frat parties there. I never thought there was anything odd about the building, other than it was incredibly run down, and the party was evacuated due to a smell of gas in the building, which thankfully turned out not to be an emergency. I never happened to return, but I pass by the building every night when I go for my walk. Yesterday, I went for my evening walk, and for the first time, as I passed the building, I decided to look at it more closely. In the parking lot behind the building, there were, as always, 2 children around 10 to 15 kicking around a soccer ball. I waved at them as I passed and looked up at the building. I looked into the darkness inside, but one window behind the second floor deck caught my eye. I couldn't make out if it was male or female, and I couldn't see any facial features, just the outline of a person staring out the window in the direction of the children. The 2 children know me and recognise me from my walks each day, so I asked, "Do you see someone in that window there?" But by the time they looked up, it was gone. I guess it was my imagination. No one would be able to get up into that building. The doors are completely boarded up. Forget I said anything. I knew what I saw, but I didn't want to scare the children, who lived in the next building over. Today, I was intent to capture a photo of the figure in the second floor window. As I passed by the building and waved at the children playing soccer, I nervously looked at the building, but I couldn't see any figure in the second floor window. After scanning the building with my eyes, right as I was about to give up and chalk it up to my imagination, I finally saw it. This time, the figure was in the 3rd floor window, right in the centre of the building, looking out at the deck, watching the children. I was able to deduce that the figure is male. It was wearing what resembled a roller derby hat, completely dark, with no facial features discernible, standing out among the darkness. I racked my brain for an explanation of whether a person could possibly be in that building, and how it could be possible since the ceiling is caved in on most of the building, the doors are boarded up, and only the back windows are not. The upper levels of the deck are not even accessible from the outside of the building, so it is unlikely someone climbed up the deck. Could it be a spirit? Why would he be watching the children? Why is he there? Black hat, trench coat, changing face, and a loss of time, by Lily 143. It was 8:07 p.m, and there was an amazing pink sunset that summer night. I remember the view coming down the hill that night. My sister and I needed to run to the 7-Eleven that was about 3 miles away to grab a pack of smokes and some vino. Classy, I know, but I was 21 at the time and was glad to be able to. So, mission accomplished, we headed home. We couldn't have been gone longer than 10 minutes. However, when we got to the main intersection after driving through the suburbs for 5 minutes, the night seemed to have fallen rather quickly. I mean, it was dark. On top of that, the fog rolled in like no one's business, and fog in San Diego in the middle of summer is almost unheard of, at least at 8 p.m. inland. So, we sat at the main intersection to get home, which crossed a main thoroughfare, and we sat, and we sat. We realised that quite some time had passed by, and absolutely no cars had gone past, on a main thoroughfare that is quite busy. We had been talking together so much that we didn't even notice that the radio wasn't playing any music. I assumed I had turned the volume down. Nope. We only realised that when we looked down at the clock, and it was 8:52 p.m. 8:52 p.m? That made no sense, and we commented on it. And the fog? and complete darkness like it would be at, say, 3 a.m. We were so confused and commented as such. I would have ran the light, but this is a major intersection, and with the fog from nowhere, bad idea. I mean, God forbid a car rolled through right then. I, being the older sister, opted to wait it out and lit another smoke. Still trying to get the tunes on the radio to work. A no-go. My sister and I got real quiet while we waited. Conversation died from confusion. So we puffed on our smokes, looking around, saying how creepy everything felt. And then, at the same time, what the hell is that? Not who, but what. Because it was so bizarre. Out of a ravine that ran along the thoroughfare that was full of eucalyptus trees came a thing. I won't even call it a man. It was wearing a black wide-brimmed hat and a trench coat, that was for sure. The rest is unexplainable. It had no feet, it had no hands, and it did not move like a human. It looked like it was walking with a limp, or like it was in a body it didn't know how to operate. It walked straight out of this ravine forest area onto this highway and made a beeline for my car. And I use the term walk very loosely. It was awkward and weird. I thought for a second that I should help him because he seemed to be having trouble. Then I noticed how swiftly he was navigating this road and realized it was headed straight for my car, with purpose. As it advanced, I stared straight under the hat so I could remember this very odd situation. And I'll say this. To this day, I cannot describe what I saw. His face seemed to morph. It looked like an owl, a turtle, an eagle, a horse, and at one point a human. It just kept changing. My sister started to get hysterical, and at the same time, we were both shouting, "What the fuck? What the fuck?" over and over, because it was completely unexplainable. She yelled at me to roll up the window, which I did, but we still sat and stared. He crossed about 60 yards in 5 seconds, still coming towards the car. There was nothing else in sight, it had to be us. My sister was screaming at me to run the light, but I couldn't. Call it curiosity, numbness, not wanting to cross a highway in thick fog. I don't know. I wasn't moving. In retrospect, it was complete curiosity. I was scared, no doubt, but I wanted to see what he was doing. He got within feet of my car, inches, on the driver's side, my side. Then I realized he wanted us. He lunged for my door handle and had what seemed like freakishly long arms. At that exact moment, the light turned green, and I floored it out of there. It was odd at best. We crossed the intersection before I looked in the rearview mirror. My sister, however, stared at him the whole way through, and as we sped off, his arms raised in the air as if to say, "Ugh." She told me to look and see how he was throwing what she called a tantrum in the intersection. I turned around, and he was gone, no longer in the middle of the road. So we get home, and my mum was freaking out at us and standing in the middle of the driveway with the neighbours crying. We get inside the house, and the clock says 10:43. 10:43? Where had that time gone? I assume we told her our story, because she told us that we did several years later. But I don't remember doing that, and never talked about the experience for at least 5 years. Ever. Not the next morning, not with my mum. She didn't bring it up. It was like it was gone from our memory. Then, one evening, my sister and I were on my balcony 5 or 6 years later, and I have no idea how or why, but the whole story popped up into my head, and I asked her if she remembered it. She went completely pale, and we were both covered in goosebumps. It felt like a dream because I hadn't thought about it since, but was completely real because I know I lived it. She told the exact same recollection I had without any guidance. It was like it was erased from our memory, but once it popped back in and we talked about it, it was as vivid as like it happened yesterday. The Face in the Camera Screen by North Coasty 19. I am an investigating consultant for some insurance companies. Basically, I get hired to go out and look at property insurance claims when the insurance company is having a hard time figuring it out to try and determine what happened. Unfortunately, I am considered an essential employee during the COVID-19 shutdown and still have to go into people's homes. I've been wearing white disposable dust masks as a precaution and request the homeowners put a mask on if they can, so we can avoid spreading anything to each other. A week or so ago, I had a claim to inspect in an 1850s Victorian house in northeast Ohio near Erie. The house was a bed and breakfast at one point and absolutely huge. There were even rumours of the home having been involved in the Underground Railroad. For the purpose of my inspection, I had to go into the basement. The basement was like a maze, with brick vaulted supports in areas, portions where you can stand, and portions that are only crawl spaces. I was wearing my N95 mask, and the homeowner was wearing one as well. I went into a portion of the basement where I had to hop over this partial wall and duck under a low brick archway support. Then, it opened up into a larger area where I could partially stand. I'm taking photographs for my report, using an actual digital camera versus my phone. The digital camera had one of those rear-facing image screens, would flash the image of the photo I just took, hold it up on the screen for a second, and the screen would go black for a second before it would pull up the live view for me to take my next photo. As I take a picture, and the screen goes blank, I see a reflection of a woman right behind me in the screen. I assumed it was the homeowner who followed me into this area, but it still startled me. I turned to look, and there's nobody there. This all took place over the course of a second. I go back to the opening to this room, and look out to see the homeowner standing in a different part of the basement with her N95 mask on. The reflection I saw wasn't wearing a mask. So I'm freaked out, but I have to continue my inspection. I take another picture, and sure enough, there's a reflection of someone in the room behind me. It wasn't my own reflection, because I could see my face, which, since I'm close to the camera, was so big it took up half the screen. This was like the shoulders, neck, and head of a female figure, standing about 5 to 6 feet behind me over my right shoulder. I turn around. Nobody there. Since I paid better attention this time, I noticed the figure was wearing some type of head covering, like a tight hood or bonnet. But it was very thin material and tight around her head. She was definitely female, but looked older than the homeowner, who was probably in her 30s. This lady looked about late 40s. So I continued my inspection and didn't see the reflection again. I was there for professional reasons and didn't want to come off weird bringing up that I think I saw a ghost in her basement, so I didn't outright bring it up to the owner. But I asked a few leading questions to try and get her to talk about if she thought her house was haunted. She didn't say anything. Red-Eyed People in My Room by Madeline 4610. Ever since I can remember, my dad, being the soggy piece of lettuce that he is, always made me feel uneasy when I was with him. No, he never hit me or assaulted me in any way, he's not that soggy. But I always felt like we were never alone in the many homes that we lived in. This time in particular, I was around 7 or 8 and was visiting my dad for the week in Oklahoma. My dad and new stepmom had just moved into a new house, and it was only us 3 and my dog. I had a small room with my bed against the wall facing my closet. I had a small dresser with a TV that had an automatic shut-off because I could never fall asleep without it on. Another strange fact about being with my dad is that I was deathly afraid of the dark, just like any young kid is. But when I would stay with him, I always felt compelled to sleep with no lights on. However, I would always, and I mean always, make sure that I had my closet light on with the door shut before I went to sleep. And this is the same in any house that I lived in with him. Every morning I would wake up with my door shut and the light on, so I knew my dad never came into my room and turned it off. So this was not a one-time thing. One night I fell asleep watching some TV like usual with my same closet situation. I woke up at around 3 AM, and at this time I didn't know what this means, but to my surprise, it was not good. So I awoke to my closet door open and the light turned off. I instantly felt sick to my stomach, with complete body chills. I know that this was not sleep paralysis because I was able to sit up and I could move my arms, legs and eyes. I looked to the side where my dresser ended and saw these freaky looking people with grey skin and red eyes. There were 4 men, 2 little girls and 2 little boys. On the far left there were 2 little girls that looked scarily like me from the past when I went to a Catholic school and wore green checkered jumper dresses and had long brown hair. In the middle, closest to the girls, were 2 identical men in business suits and black hair. The men to the right of them had all grey on, baggy sweatpants and baggy hoodies and grey tennis shoes. Then, to the right of them on the end, were the 2 little boys with identical clothes to the men in grey sweats. I just about crapped my pants. The 2 men in suits started whispering to me, and the voices I eventually heard were threats to kill me and all of my family if I didn't get them to leave in a certain amount of time. You don't have long. We will kill you. You better hurry, hurry, we will kill you. They kept repeating until finally one of the little girls screamed and ran toward me, and they disappeared right as I opened my mouth to scream. To my surprise, it was my own scream the whole time. However, I know that I wasn't sleeping, as I could move and jump right out of bed to run to my parents' room. My dad and stepmom were annoyed that I woke them up, but became scared when they saw that I ironically looked like I had seen a ghost. But oh, not just 1, 8. They were still being the trash bags filled with wet socks that they are, and didn't really do much about it after that night. My mum doesn't really believe in this type of thing, but when I told her, she looked terrified and simply prayed over me a few times. Purgatory Road. During August 2018, my friends and I took a road trip from New York City to Rhode Island. None of us had been to Rhode Island before, so we were excited about the drive, especially because we had rented a Mustang convertible for it. We left a little later than expected. It was about 10:30 at night, and since it was a busy Friday night, we decided to punch our destination into the Waze traffic app to beat the traffic. Eventually we started losing steam, so my friend in the back seat fell asleep and I just kept driving along quietly, when my friend in the passenger seat told me to exit the freeway to take a side road. At first, driving on the unlit winding back roads was relaxing, but then the wind picked up and it got increasingly foggy and misty. I wasn't scared per se, just a little on edge. I thought about pulling over to put the top up, but decided against it since there were no cars in sight. Heavy rain was projected for the entire weekend, so I wanted to get the most out of the convertible. So I kept going along as normal, if not a little too fast, to get back to the main roads as quickly as possible, when something just shifted. I don't know how to explain it, other than an unsettling, exposed feeling. I remember pulling my sweater over my legs to cover up. Then my friend up front told me to look at the street sign in the distance. It read, Purgatory. We woke up our friend in the back seat, who sort of scoffed. Seconds later, we went round a bend where a large red cross was installed on the side of the road with nothing else in sight. We just shrugged it off as a creepy coincidence. By then we were kind of joking about it and indulging in the spookiness. But around the next bend, a big truck came hurtling down the one-lane road, aimed straight at us. Luckily my impulse was to swerve a little to the side, otherwise it probably would have resulted in a head-on collision. My friend tried to get his license plate number, but he sped off, while my other friend found the quickest route away from this particular road. We didn't really discuss what happened afterward because we were too creeped out, and we haven't talked about it since. While writing down this story, I decided to look it up. I spent an hour trying to retrace our route and found the little road. It was indeed named Purgatory, and though we didn't notice it at the time, Google Maps revealed that Purgatory was situated next to an old graveyard. Curious about the road, I researched it further and discovered that 2 teenage girls had died there in August of 2011 in an accident on their way to visit the grave of Rhode Island's infamous vampire, Mercy Brown. Apparently they decided to go for a drive down this dark and winding road because they thought it looked haunted. A watery grave. I didn't grow up believing in ghosts. Then one morning when we were 16, when my friend's mum picked us up for a carpool, I mentioned that I was really creeped out by this bathroom under the stairs in my house that no one ever used. I couldn't exactly define why I felt this way. I just found it eerie. The house where I grew up in was an old Victorian home built in the 1800s, so eerie vibes were part of the package. Hearing this reminded my friend of her own creepy bathroom association. She told me that when she lived in the German countryside for a year, there was a little section in the home that no one but her middle sister used, who was about 9 years old at the time. During this time period, her sister would wake up with bloodshot eyes, sometimes even bruises, and feel totally exhausted. They did everything to investigate what was going on, including sleeping in her room, working with a child psychologist, and a school counsellor. My friend doesn't remember much from this time period, other than her sister being disturbed by something the year they lived there. She mentioned that she and her other sister, the eldest, also hated using that bathroom because they would always feel off and find thick black hairs stuck in the drain, even though each of them had fine blonde hair. At this point in the story, my friend's mum abruptly stopped the car and jerked her head around and said, "That's where the woman who once lived there killed herself. She drowned herself in the bathtub." Her mum was clearly shaken. She said part of the reason they moved because something felt off in the house. The Witch of Ditmar by Annie 82. I don't know if you believe in God. I can't even truly be sure of that question myself. What I am sure of is that there are forces, things, or entities out there that we do not understand. Things that can possibly harm us, or at least terrorize us. Things that I would love to stay the hell away from, and I would advise you to do the same. Some people, such as my little brother, don't quite understand that, and every day I'm worried he will find himself in a situation he cannot escape. This story took place between 19 and 25 years ago, in Austin, Texas. My family, consisting of both my parents, my older brother Ben, my baby brother Eric, my older sister Eileen, and myself, who had just moved back to South Austin from Bay City, Texas. My parents wanted to be close to the rest of our family, so they bought an old 3-bedroom, 1-story house in a small neighbourhood near South 1st Street. The house itself was ugly and looked like one of those small prisons you would see in some sort of Wild West show. But as for the neighbourhood, well, I really enjoyed it. There was a park not too far away called Ditmar, and I believe the huge creek that ran through our neighbourhood had the same first name. It was a beautiful place. Everyone had big trees in their yard and woods surrounded us. I used to love walking around or just going into the creek and relaxing while no one was around. My whole family liked it as well, especially Eric. I was exactly 7 years older than he was, but he was a fast learner. He was a bit of a free-range child that seemed to never really be afraid of anything. As a baby he rarely cried, even when he had a fever, so bad that he had to be rushed to the children's hospital. He turned 3 in that house, and by then he was already walking, talking, and peeing outside. He learned to potty train by watching Ben, who used to purposely go to the bathroom outside to anger my grandparents. My parents said he was the quickest one to become potty trained out of all of us. One day I was watching Boy Meets World on our TV in the living room, when I heard Eric talking to someone in our parents' room. I put on Power Rangers in there for him, since that was the only place that had another TV, but I couldn't hear it playing anymore. What I did hear sounded like the occasional whisper, followed by Eric simply talking loudly. When I walked in to investigate, he was just sitting there on my parents' bed, looking into the mirror at the head of it. I asked him, "Who are you talking to?" with a slight giggle in my voice, and he turned to look at me as if I had just caught him sneaking the cat inside. He then grinned from ear to ear and replied, "No one." I then said as sarcastically as I could, "Oh really? No one, huh? Liars don't get cookies from the cookie jar." He jumped up and quickly yelled, Okay, I was talking to Chuck." I was relieved, because Chuck had been his imaginary friend since we first moved in. In fact, I think it started when my dad let him watch Child's Play, and instead of being terrified of the creepy little doll monster like a normal person, he became obsessed with it, like a little weirdo. He would watch that movie every year when it came on in October, until he turned 14. So I decided to play around with him, and say, "No you weren't, you were talking to someone else." I was expecting him to say something along the lines of "Who?" and I would quickly respond back, "Yourself," and throw a pillow at him and run away. But instead, he did something that sent shivers down my spine. He tensed up, and a look of shock and surprise took hold of his face. Then he looked at the mirror quickly and said, "I didn't tell her, I swear." I did not know how to react. I just stood there dumbfounded. I then hesitantly asked him, "Who were you really talking to?" He looked up at me as if he was going to cry and said, "Mummy Ego." Then he pointed at the mirror grimly. My body moved almost robotically as I slowly moved to look in the mirror. I saw nothing, so I got closer and started squinting my eyes. Suddenly I saw it, but it was too late. A pillow smacked me across the back of my head. "Eric!" I yelled as he bolted out of the door, shouting "Gotcha!" That night after dinner was a different story. Eileen and I were washing dishes when my dad walked in to get a soda out the fridge. There was just something about that name that bothered me. What kind of 3-year-old would come up with that? The whole thing was just disturbing. Therefore, seeing as my dad was the one person Eric talked to the most in our family, I asked him if he had ever heard him say anything about a mommy ego. My dad just looked at me as if that was normal, and said, "Oh, yeah, I think that's one of his imaginary friends or something. I asked him about her once, and all he said was that she's a secret or something." That made me feel a little uneasy. I had to know more now. I was still skeptical about the whole thing, and I thought, well, maybe it really was all just in his head, but part of me needed some sort of confirmation that Mummy Ego was just a figment of a child's overactive imagination. The next day, I asked Eric about her again, a little more sternly while he was watching TV in the living room. He wasn't really fazed by this at the time, and mostly kept his eyes glued to the TV. "She's the old lady that lives in the attic," he said vaguely. That caught me a little off guard and confused, so I said, "She lives in our attic?" "No, she doesn't live here. Chuck does. She only comes to visit from time to time, and when she does, she sleeps in the attic." "Wait, Chuck lives here?" I asked. "Yeah, he told me this used to be his house. and Mummy Ego used to visit him too. Now I was really feeling scared, but I had to know one more thing. So, if Mummy Ego doesn't live here, where does she live? Chuck said she lives in the woods by the creek, near the dead goat skeleton. Mummy Ego also told me she sees you sometimes hanging out at the creek by the big tree, he said as he looked away from the TV and right at me. A chill went down my spine. To think some creepy old woman was watching me while I was alone. Then it occurred to me, maybe he's messing with me again, and he's been spying on me like some little twerp the whole time. I asked him if she was visiting now, and he looked back at the TV and said, "I don't know. Go check the attic in the garage and see." "Come with me then," I replied in a sort of sarcastic way. "She doesn't like it when I go in there and bother her," he said. "Because she's not real," I found myself shouting. He just shrugged, and that was the end of our conversation. Things got weird after that day. It started as strange little events, but grew into somewhat larger problems. I would come home from school and find all the faucets in the house turned on, or random items in strange places, like a pot or a pan in the closet or in the cabinet of the bathroom. Pictures would be crooked, and cupboards and windows would be opened. Sometimes I would find chairs flipped over, or sitting in the hallway outside Eileen's room and mine. Then I started hearing scratching and knocking noises throughout the house. At night, I would sometimes hear what sounded like laughter or crying. A cookie jar kept falling off the shelf and breaking, and my mum would glue it back together, then find it broken again within the next day or two. But we were pretty sure it was Eric trying to sneak cookies. At least until one night, while watching Unsolved Mysteries with my dad and Eileen. It happened while Eric was at a friend's house. The even creepier part was it happened right when someone on the show said they heard a crash. My mum still blamed Eric though. She seemed to be the only one oblivious to the strange happenings going on in our home. Even my dad knew, and was a little worried. About 2 years passed, and we kind of had just gotten used to everything. When something strange happened, it would still creep us out, but no one really got hurt, and it just seemed somewhat normal. We'd put in one of those large deep freezers in the garage, directly under the attic as well, and it was there where we kept most of our frozen foods. One day I decided I was going to get a Hot Pocket. As I grabbed one and shut the freezer, I had an odd feeling I was being watched. Then, I remembered Eric telling me how Mummy Ego stays in the attic. I slowly looked up, but to my relief, all I saw was the opening that led to the crawl space, and the usual light that we never turned on, or even knew if it worked. I shrugged, and went to the door leading out. I opened the door and flipped the lights off, but as I did, my body froze in fear. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a light coming down from the attic. I gained enough courage to turn my head and see. Sure enough, the attic light was on. I didn't know whether I should dart inside and shut the door, or check out what was going on. Curiosity ended up beating out fear, and I cautiously approached the freezer to look at the attic. I will never forget that day. As I carefully lurched forward to look up the light there, looking right back down at me, with her chin resting right on the edge of the hole, was the head and face of a grinning old woman. Her hair was pulled back and tied in a bun, and her face had more wrinkles than a shriveled prune. She had no teeth in her sinister grin, just black gums that seemed to reflect the light. I couldn't see her nose too well because of the shadow cast upon her face by the light in the background, but what I could see as clear as day, and what I still see in every nightmare I have, is her eyes. Where there should have been white, there was yellow, and instead of a pupil and an iris, she simply had large black dots. Luckily my bladder was empty, because had it not been, I would have easily needed to change. I ran out screaming so hard my voice went hoarse. I wish I could say that that was the last time I saw that face. I was on edge for 3 weeks after that encounter. I would not go in the garage. I jumped at every noise, and I avoided going to the creek to relax. Those same 3 weeks, not a single strange event happened. Then, one day, I went to visit my friend JC, who lived down the street. We talked about the normal things, but then I decided to ask her if she had seen or heard anything strange in her house. Surprisingly, she did. We talked about what we had in common, and about what one of us experienced but the other did not. When I brought up the name Mummy Ego, she froze. Her little sister, who was only 2 years older than Eric, had brought up that name before. Apparently a year ago, she claimed Mummy Ego helped her get a frisbee out their tree in the yard. She said she had not heard much after that, but now she was a little worried. I went home that night and straight to my room. I thought a lot about what JC told me, but eventually sleep overtook me and I passed out. I woke the next morning to a scream and found that both Eileen's bed and mine were shaking violently. As soon as my mum and dad burst through the door, it stopped. They calmed us down and gave us breakfast. My mum didn't believe us, of course, but Dad did. Me and my sister talked a lot about it that day as well, but when I saw my little brother, he walked up to me and said, "Mummy Ego's mad at you." Then walked away. I felt sick to my stomach. This thing had left us alone for so long. Now why was it mad at me? Is it because I disturbed her in the garage? So many questions and worries passed through my head. But had she truly been mad at me, that was her only retaliation, because things went kind of back to normal. Sure, the occasional strange event, thing or noise would happen, but it was the same stuff we had gotten used to before. Another year had passed, and my sister and I wanted to have a sleepover with some friends from school. Both my parents said yes, and it was planned. They all brought their stuff to school so we could leave straight from there, and since we were all walking distance from each other on our school, we simply walked to my house afterwards and had fun. We watched movies, did makeup, curled our hair and painted our nails. You know, the stuff teenage girls did. At about 10 that night, we got a loud knock on the door. We weren't really doing much, just gossiping and playing the board game Sorry. I got up to answer, and there was Eric standing there, and he looked very upset. Before I could ask him what was wrong, he yelled, "Stop it! I know it was y'all at my window trying to scare me. I heard y'all laughing," then stormed off back across the hall to his room before I could even respond. I didn't think much of it, to be honest. I was too preoccupied with my friends, so I simply shrugged it off and went back to my room. We had all fallen asleep about 2 hours later, but for some reason, no matter how tired I felt, I just could not pass over into the world of my dreams. Then I heard a knocking on my window. Baffled at what it could be, I simply remained in bed, in hopes it was just something being blown by the wind. Then it happened again, a little louder this time. A realization came into my head. It was probably my stupid little brother trying to get some sort of vengeance on us for something we didn't do. I angrily got up and went to the window, and as I opened the blinds and prepared to tell him to go to bed, Mum and Dad would become involved in his little prank. My heart leapt to my throat, and terror took over. Standing in the window was an old woman with her hair in curlers. She had a toothless grin and yellow eyes with black dots for pupils fixed on me. My body worked almost mechanically. I shut the blinds and slowly crawled into the bed. I just stared at the window. Then I heard a tap, as if someone was tapping their long fingernails against the glass. I quickly hid under the cover and just listened to the tapping until exhaustion overtook me and I slipped into unconsciousness. I don't know when the tapping stopped, but the next morning I was the last to awaken, and no one else seemed to hear anything of the sort. I began to question whether or not I was dreaming, and honestly, when I think back to that day, I sometimes still do. Another year passed, and my dad had received a promotion at his job. Since he was going to be making a lot more money, he decided it was time to move. We didn't really notice anything weird around this time because we were so focused on packing and getting everything ready. Our house in a new neighbourhood was in its final stages of construction, and we were going to leave as quickly as we could. On the final few days of us being in the house, it started storming really bad. The creeks flooded over, and we had a non-stop tornado watch. We had the moving truck, but we could barely load it up and make trips back and forth due to the bad weather. The last day the rain let up a little, and we managed to move most of our stuff to the new house. I was so excited for this move to finally be over that I couldn't fall asleep that night. I was thinking about the new house and how I would soon have my very own room, in a place with 2 floors, when I heard our front door open and close quickly. I looked at the clock, and it read 2:30 a.m. Who the hell was up and about at this time? I got up and went outside to investigate, and as I walked out into the front yard, I saw Eric running down the street. I had no idea what he was doing, so I angrily yelled out to him to come back, but he kept running. I was barefoot and a little tired, but I spontaneously chased after him, thinking about how much trouble I'm going to make sure he's in for sneaking out. He turned down a street that was more like a cul-de-sac with a very large oak tree in the centre. As I turned down it too, I saw him jump into a space between 2 houses that led to the creek. I remembered how it was flooded down there due to the storms, so I broke into a dead sprint. I nearly fell down the slope that led to the water when I finally caught up to him. But just as I was taking a breath to yell at him, I realised he wasn't the only child there. He was standing at the water's edge with 5 other children standing around him in a half circle. They were all in dirty, soaking wet, ragged clothes, and their flesh was as pale as the moon itself. As I got closer, I could see their glossy, clouded eyes fixed on the water. Then just like that, I blinked, and they were gone, only to be replaced by 5 tyres and a wooden cross set in the centre. Eric was crouching down at this point, examining the curious structures. "What are you doing?" I yelled. I don't know," he said back confused. "You don't remember running here?" "No, I swear." I believed him. I really did. "Let's go home. We're leaving tomorrow," I told him, and we walked home, not saying a word to each other. A few weeks went by, and we were enjoying our new home. We hadn't been able to explore the neighbourhood much, though mainly because it would rain like every other day. One particular night it stormed so badly there was a flash flood warning and our power went out. I lit a candle in my room and read a book, but I figured after about an hour it would be better just to sleep until it was over. I awoke the next day to my mum telling me she had some sad news. JC's sister had snuck out during the storm and had been found in the creek. She had drowned. This Spirit Won't Leave Me Alone by Mazek Rose. This story starts back in September of 2019. We randomly had a Ouija board downstairs in our basement, and it'd just been down there for years, even before I knew what it was. One day I got the idea to just see what would happen if I tried it, but I got nothing. Then on another occasion I tried it again. I think I may have gotten some movement, but nothing that was actually really responsive. I don't remember if I requested any presences from anyone. I just think I wanted to see if the planchette would even move. The third time, I was a little bit more prepared, or so I thought. I brought some Palo Santo with me, a few candles, and I set an intention that only beings with good intentions were allowed to contact me and nothing else was allowed. I wanted to speak to my ancestors, but I was open to speaking to anyone. This time, I actually got an answer. At first it kept spelling out a bunch of random letters for like 30 minutes, He managed to tell me that he was my fourth generation great-grandfather or something along those lines, but then kept talking gibberish. At one point I had enough and said, "I'm sorry, I can't understand you," then ended the session. I tried to start a new session, but the same spirit showed up. I should have just ended it there, but I was curious as to why he still wanted to talk to me. After more time, all of a sudden it started talking like normal. The spirit said it was all a prank, and that he was a family member I knew. He said it was my first grandfather, and I believe that, because from the stories I had been told, he was a bit of a prankster. As a side note, I had never met any of these family members before they died, but I have heard countless stories. I have also always wanted to talk to them, because even though I never met them, I felt connected to them in some sort of way. Unfortunately, this is what made it so easy for the spirit to trick me. Even though I know about them through stories, I don't know them as actual people, so I just have a general idea of what they would be like. The spirit could easily manipulate me and try to be like them as much as possible, or try to fill in the gaps of what parts of their personality I didn't exactly know about. Once I found out who I thought I was talking to, we chit-chatted for a few hours, and I asked a bunch of random questions. Long story short, not only did the spirit make me believe that I was talking to a dead family member of mine, throughout our conversation he tricked me into thinking I had a dead sister that I had no idea about, and fed me a bunch of other lies. After a while it was late, and I was tired, so I went back upstairs to sleep, planning to talk to this sister the next day. I woke up the next day, and after I got home from running errands, I immediately went back downstairs to the board. Me and this sister would talk about anything for hours on end, for at least 2 weeks. I had my suspicions, and sometimes I felt really weird after using the board, but I didn't think too much of it. Then, one day, me and the sister were talking, and she said that I had a family member who was alive, and who I didn't know about yet. Apparently, she had the phone number for this family member, and gave it to me. Through an international calling app, I tried to contact the person, but it didn't go through. Afterwards, I really began to suspect that I wasn't talking to my family members, and that it was something else. I told the sister that I was suspicious, and I asked if I was really talking to them. Finally, the spirit confessed to having completely lied to me this entire time. I asked the spirit who he was, and he lied to me again, and said that he was the ghost of a person who once lived at my apartment before me. Apparently his name was James, and he was mad at us for not taking care of the apartment like he wanted, and that's why he pranked me. I didn't really believe this, especially since it's not like it's a hoarder's paradise around here. I confronted him about it, though, and told him that if it was all true, it was wrong to go that far, and he should have just come forth and told me who he was. Though I was angry, I tried really hard to stay cool, because I heard that sometimes getting mad at a spirit only makes things worse. He apologised, and I tried to send him on his way to a better place. After that, I felt horrible over the next few days. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened, and I was really confused. Then I came across a video talking about automatic writing. I decided to try it out to see if it would work, and I thought it might be a safer way to get answers. In the video, it said that it might take a while to get the hang of automatic writing, but to my surprise, it came naturally to me. I tried contacting someone who was a guide of mine to get some answers, but I ended up getting tricked again. Shortly afterwards, I started talking to who I thought were my relatives again. For some reason, I talked to more of them, and I got what I thought was better, clearer answers at first. I was still skeptical though, because I had been through so much with James already, but I wanted to see if it was all real. Eventually, after a few weeks of writing, I started to be able to hear them. I could hear what they were going to say even before it was written. I could start to hear full sentences, voice tones, pitches, and even multiple people at once. I could speak to them through my mind. Sometimes, if I couldn't hear them, I'd ask a question in my mind, and they would write down the answer. I didn't mind it too much at first, but then it started to become a lot to handle, I could hear them 24/7, and it became a huge part of my life. I think it was cool to hear them, but it was overwhelming to hear them so often. I thought it was a psychic power I had that was overactive, which made it so I heard them all the time. This went on for a few months, and as it continued, I got more and more suspicious. But they kept reassuring me that one day they'd be able to prove it to me that it was them. The entire time I felt something was off, but I didn't know what it was. I knew James was still hanging around too, because I could hear him as well. Then, in December, my father passed away. Afterward, the voices seemed to stop, and it was a great relief. After a while of not having anyone talk to me, I began to suspect that the entire time James was behind it all. I didn't think you could make it sound like I was hearing multiple voices, and even different tones, but it seems to make the most sense at this point. I can't exactly remember when I came to that conclusion. That conclusion has not changed since. Gradually, I started hearing voices often again, and now I'm hearing him 24/7. But it's as himself this time, no one else. Before, when I thought I was talking with my relatives, we just chit-chat all the time, even about the most mundane things. Now he just criticises me and makes snarky comments. This may sound like a joke, but he does stuff like this to annoy me. If I even brush my teeth the wrong way, he'll make comments. It's really strange, but he'll do literally anything in his power to annoy or even upset me. Nothing I have done to get rid of him has worked so far. I've tried prayers, that white light trick, sage. I've even stopped automatic writing and burning the notebook I used to do the writing in. The only thing I haven't done, and I'm really kicking myself in the rear for not doing, is burning the Ouija board. Back in October, I wanted to get rid of the board really bad. This entire time I have not had a mentor or anything, so I've been going by the internet, or what I think might help, since I've no prior experience with the spirit world. I thought about burning the board, and I heard somewhere that they could actually make the situation worse, so I just gave it up to a place that sells board games. They said they didn't accept Ouija boards because they already had enough of them. However, if you leave something out there that wasn't accepted, they'll just trash it, and that's what I did. So, most likely it was trashed, and wasn't burned. This is not something I can live with for the rest of my life. I wish I knew what to do to make this all go away, but I don't. A Night I Will Never Forget by PL Thrill 25. When I was 16 years old, my father passed away, and this caused me to waver in my faith. I was born and raised Catholic. I wasn't really a practicing Catholic, but I had my beliefs. Well, at that time, I questioned why God would take my father away from me, so I was mad. I was 17 years old, just got a car, and loved to drive. I was invited over to my friend Anthony's house one summer night, and decided to go hang out with him. A little bit about Anthony. He's what I refer to as an acquired taste. Very dark, messy, and does things for attention. But for some reason I liked hanging out with him, because I never got in trouble. A lot of it was my mother couldn't stand him, and my father was indifferent to him. But my mother not liking him made me want to hang out with him even more. So we're hanging out at his place, in his basement playing video games and chatting. After a while we were just talking about nothing really, but he made a comment and I said, "Oh, God." Without missing a beat he says, "God, huh? You still believe there's a God?" "I'm not sure anymore. I haven't really seen much proof since my dad died." "God's a fraud, it's all smoke and mirrors," he said. At that exact moment, the lights flickered quickly. "Did you see that?" I said. "Need any more proof?" "Dude, let's just drop it," I said as I stood up. He walked past me and went to the bookshelf and took a Bible out. He threw it on the ground and said, "I'll show you there's no God. I'm going to take a piss on this Bible and watch. God won't stop me." At that moment, I was done and wanted to leave. I turned to leave when I noticed that it got really hot in the room. My back was to Anthony, but he wasn't saying anything. I got really bad feeling, like horror movie style. I turn around and see him frozen in place, his head tilted back and his mouth open. In shock, I say, "Anthony, are you alright?" And I notice a foul, rotten egg smell, and his head snapped back into place. I see his eyes roll to the back of his head, and the lights flicker again, but came back on very dimly. I, thinking he was up to his old tricks, told him to knock it off. He started laughing maniacally, and his voice started to deepen throughout the laugh. I started to freak out a little and went to leave again. All of a sudden I feel a hand on my shoulder, and he steps in front of me, blocking my way. I could feel how hot his hand was through my shirt. I pushed him off me and started moving backwards as he advanced slowly. I tripped over the Bible on the ground, and finally he started talking in a deep, guttural voice in a language I didn't understand. At this point, I completely believe that he is not kidding. I've known him for years and know that he barely has a grasp on the English language, let alone a foreign one. Not knowing if it would help, I pick up the Bible, and he winces and moves his head away and fell to the ground with his body kneeling and his head resting on the couch. I open the Bible and start reading out loud. I couldn't even tell you what I was reading. I was just so freaked out. I turn the page and hear him say ever so slightly, but still in that deep voice,
"Stop it."
I ignore him and just keep reading. Then all of a sudden the Bible was pushed from my hands by some supernatural force. I look at him and I see he's drooling and his eyes are still white. He says,
"I've been watching you, and I will always be watching you. I will come back to visit you in 7 years.
Right after saying that, the lights go back to full power, and he's literally thrown on the ground and starts coughing and rolling like he's in pain as the temperature in the room goes back to normal. I stand back as he sits up and says, "What the hell happened?" I say, "Anthony, I've got to leave right now." He tries to stop me, but I just run out. I get in my car, and I can hear that voice in my head. Anthony and I stayed friends for a few years after this incident, and he asked me not to tell him what happened. He says he completely blacked out and doesn't remember a thing. Now, I know how this story sounds. Even telling it seems far-fetched, but it happened just the way I described. After that, we lost touch, but as I think back now, maybe my mother had a point. The Day I Will Never Forget by Shan Goldsmith. This experience happened in 2011, and I still haven't forgotten it, and don't think I will ever forget it. I was 6 years old at the time, and had school that Wednesday morning. For some reason I woke up at 5 AM. At first I didn't think much of it, but at least a minute after, I heard something that still scares me to this day. I heard a girl's voice. She sounded quite young. It sounded like it was coming from the bottom of the stairs, and my room was the closest bedroom to the stairs to make things worse. The girl was calling my dog's name for some reason. This is where it gets terrifying. You know in horror films where the murderer calls out the person's name 3 times in that creepy voice? Well, it sounded exactly like that. She called out, "Tyler, Tyler, Tyler." So as she was saying my dog's name, it sounded like she was saying it louder and louder. So the conclusion I came to was that she was coming up the stairs. Well, that's what I immediately thought, and because I thought she was coming up the stairs, I was too scared to get up and run into my parents' room, just in case I saw her. Instead of running to my parents' room, I just hid under my covers and began to cry. I cried myself to sleep and was awoken by my mother a few hours later for school. I went to school that day and told everyone what happened, and they all looked at me like I was crazy. As my mum collected me from school, I then told her what happened that morning, and she was even scared herself. Unfortunately, more things happened after that. Things were thrown, and then an unexplainable thing happened to my mother. Thankfully, I moved out of the house soon after that experience. and now I'm living in Ireland. But now things are happening here. Not extreme things like things being thrown, but around a month ago, I heard the girl again. This time, she was calling my name. I was just lying down in bed, nearly falling off to sleep from a hard day at school, and you're probably thinking, oh, you're just tired. Well, that's not the case. As I said, I was lying down nearly asleep, and all of a sudden I hear this whisper saying my name. At first I thought it was my mother seeing if I was awake, but as I sat up in the bed, I looked around, and there was no one to be seen. It sounded so realistic, and now I've been seeing dark black shadows down at the bottom of the stairs, which look like a little girl. I told my parents about it, and they said they've seen the same thing too. So at least I'm not going crazy. The Thing by the River by Corpse Guts. I never really believed in ghosts or anything supernatural before I had this experience with my friends. I have a lot of stories my friends would consider supernatural, but this exact story still scares me to this day. Even though it happened months ago, I still think about it all the time. The fact that we never found out what the thing was really bothered me. Over the summer, me, my mum, and a couple of friends of mine all went to Sturgis, South Dakota, because my mum took an assignment there. We originally lived in Kansas. We stayed there the entire summer, and a little bit of the school year. My mum rented a house with her roommate, while me and my 3 friends all lived in a house down the street from my mum's. A few months passed, and things were pretty good in South Dakota. The people were all nice, the nature was breathtaking, and there was nothing but positive vibes. That all took a very dramatic turn one day, while my mum and Michelle were eating lunch at the Knuckle Saloon, a world-famous bar and grill in Sturgis. My friends and I decided to drive 30 minutes to Rapid City to go shopping, since we had just gotten our allowances from our parents, and one of my friends is old enough to drive. So we drive to Rapid City and go shopping for a few hours, until she decides that she's bored and wants to go exploring, since that was only our second time in the city. We leave the mall and drive for around an hour or so, until we find a beautiful waterfall hidden behind a bunch of trees and boulders. She parks the car, and we all get out to take pictures of the waterfall. We end up staying there more than 15 minutes, because we ended up hiking around the waterfall to take more pictures. One of my friends decides that she wants to explore on her own, to take her own photos for her Instagram, so she wanders off and we don't think anything of it. My other friend who drove and I are still taking pictures with our cameras and are on Snapchat bragging to everyone about our view, when all of a sudden we hear a blood-curdling scream coming from the opposite end of the waterfall. We kind of just look at each other completely shook and unsure of what to do, so we run toward the direction of the scream, and we see our friend in the river, confused as to how she got there. So we run down the hill to her to see what was wrong. She didn't say a single word. She just pointed towards a bunch of trees. We both look in the direction she's pointing and see a black figure. I couldn't make out what it was, but I swear that it wasn't human or alive. It had the body of a little girl, but we couldn't see the face. It was completely black. As soon as I saw the figure, I held my friends up and over the railings, and we all ran to the car and drove off. Later that night, I decided to ask my friend what happened and how she managed to fall over the railing, down the hill, and into the river. She told me that she was just leaning over the railing to get photos of the river, when all of a sudden, she feels someone tap on her back. She thought it was either me or our other friend, and doesn't think much of it. So she proceeds to take pictures of the river, when all of a sudden, she felt someone forcefully push her over the railing. She went tumbling down the hill and into the river. She says that she looked up to see what had pushed her, and it was the figure of a little girl. She couldn't see the face or anything because it was completely black. So she stands up and starts screaming at the girl. These were her exact words. I stood up to ask the thing that pushed me why it did that, when all of a sudden, it comes flying at my face, literally flying. I fell back down and started weeping and crying, calling for you guys. I don't know what that thing was, but I definitely know it wasn't human. I brushed it off, thinking it was a bunch of nonsense and that she was only trying to scare me. Until the next day, when we drive past the waterfall with my mum to go see Mount Rushmore, and my mum pulls up a news article about a little girl who drowned in the river a year ago. I get the shivers down my back and immediately get goosebumps on my arms. She was telling the truth all along. My Dad Won't Talk About It by Jelly Beanie Kid. We used to live in a flat above a pub that my dad owned. It was huge and had 2 floors, with my parents' bedroom, the living room, my dad's office, the cash office cupboard and the bathroom downstairs, and mine and my older brother's bedrooms upstairs. From my understanding, the pub used to be an old bed and breakfast, as we discovered as we were moving out that there was actually a bunch of other rooms behind mine and my brother's upstairs, as well as one above the flat door containing a rocking chair, both to my excitement and the horror of my parents. I only found out recently the amount of experiences and paranormal things that went on when I lived there. One of the first things that would happen was things would go missing. It was cliché, but my mum, who was completely aware that there was a presence in the flat, would complain to herself after losing her keys and then come back in the room and they would be there. Even after looking for almost an hour, they would appear. My mum also talked about hearing running upstairs while she was alone in the flat, when me and my brother were at school or at my grandparents'. She even recalled one experience of being in my bedroom, putting away my washing and clothes, when she felt something tugging her cardigan and what she thought was me, saying, "Mum, Mum, Mum." She told me, "Wait a minute," and then heard her running away. But after, she would go downstairs and remember that me and my brother were at my grandparents' for dinner. Another time she was standing talking to one of the barmen from the pub in the cash office, with her back to the living room, when she heard this God Almighty crash from there. The huge painting which hung above the couch was across the room in front of the TV. She said she knows that pictures fall downwards, but this had gone across the actual room. An experience had by my parents' best friends at the time was in my older brother's bedroom. Now his room was in a weird L shape, with the bed against the far wall behind the door. We'll call my parents' friends D and V. They stayed the night at the flat, while me and my brother stayed at my grandparents'. They said when they went into my brother's bedroom, the bed, which was a huge chunky double one, was in the middle of the room. They thought it was weird, but it was just my brother's decorating. But all through the night they heard scratching and noises. After they left the next morning, my mum went to put some washing in my brother's room and couldn't get in. She managed to shove the door open a few inches to see that the bed had been pushed up against the bedroom door, as if to block it. She immediately called V and demanded what the hell she had done. V starts crying and saying it was horrible staying in there and she hadn't done anything with the room. And anyway, how was she supposed to push a huge double bed right against the door while also closing it? Other little things, like our dog barking at the same corner every night, happened, and my little brother started pointing at the same corner and started to say, "Bad man," and would ask my mum to tell the bad man to go away. Now, the final experience that I was told really shocked me. My dad doesn't believe in this stuff, completely denies it, but he will not talk about what went on in the flat. So he comes home from work and went to have a shower. During it, he heard a knocking on the bathroom door. Thankfully, we had a huge bolt lock on the door, but I doubt that would have helped. And he heard a woman saying, "Hello, hello, hello," and knocking continuously. It went away, and my dad just assumed it was my mum coming back because she'd forgotten something. Later on, my mum comes home with me and my brothers, and he asked her what she forgot. She's confused as hell and said she never came home, and she's been at my grandparents' all day. He asks if she's joking, and she says no. She told me that his face just dropped, and he went so pale. If I'm honest, I don't remember anything going on, probably because I was so young, but my mum swears that something was in that flat. She never felt threatened or in danger, but there was definitely something there. Oh, and one last little thing. My mum's friend who lived across the road once asked my mum why she didn't wave back at her one night, and my mum was confused. Apparently her friend had woken up in the middle of the night and thought she saw my mum holding my little brother in the window, and she waved at her, but this woman just stared back. I think that one freaks my mum out a little bit. I don't expect to be believed whenever I choose to share this story, by Tim. One night in December 2004, I was driving back to Brighton from my workplace near Lindfield in Sussex, a little after 11 p.m. I worked in a care home and the hours were unsociable. The journey took me along the B2112 from Wivelsfield through the village of Ditchling, and then a left turn onto Beacon Road before ascending the very steep winding road known as Ditchling Bostel, leading up to Ditchling Beacon, the tallest peak on the Sussex Downs. I passed through the quiet village, and as the streetlights came to an end, flicked on my main beams and shifted into low gear to negotiate the tight bends which snaked their way up the hillside, trees reaching in from either side of the road to meet in the middle. As I made my way around the fourth turn on the ascent, about 2/3 of the way up the incline, my headlamps illuminated the back of a tall male figure, striding up the right side of the road and travelling in the same direction as me. High leather boots, a long dark coat, and a wide-brimmed hat were clearly picked out in the Ford Escort's halogen main beams. My immediate impulse was to avoid hitting the unexpected walker, who I assumed to be a farmer, perhaps making his way home from one of the village pubs. High earthen banks and dense trees lined both sides of the road, and there was nowhere for a pedestrian to move out of the way of traffic. It occurred to me that maybe something was wrong, like his car had broken down in the village, and he could use a lift up such a punishingly steep hill on such a cold night. I eased off the throttle, coming to a halt halfway between the two bends with my foot on the brake pedal, and lowered the driver's window. I could clearly see the figure reflected in my door mirror, still striding up the side of the road towards me, and brightly lit by the brake lights. As he drew closer, I cleared my throat, and prepared to ask him if he needed a lift up the hill, and then I noticed one tiny detail. He had no face. The hat, the coat, and even a scarf knotted at the throat were plain to see in the bright red brake lights, but where the face should have been, there was nothing but darkness. It wasn't in shadow from the hat, and the brakes were low down and lit the figure completely. It wasn't a balaclava or any other face covering, as that would have at least shown an outline. Above the scarf and below the hat, there was simply nothing at all. I tried to rationalise what I'd seen, but I couldn't come up with anything. I don't expect to be believed whenever I choose to share this story, and I accept that there is always a high level of ridicule levelled at people who claim they've had a brush with something inexplicable. My Parents' House by 8-Bit Demigod. The house where my parents and I currently live was the house I grew up in. We moved there when I was 5. I moved out in my early 20s, but moved back a couple of years ago in mutual agreement, in which they get rent and high-speed internet, and I get a place to sleep that didn't have a hole in the roof, or outlets that threatened to burn the place down if I tried to charge more than one item at a time. First, a description of the layout. The house is a single-storey 3-bedroom with a decent-sized living room, 1.5 bathrooms, and a kitchen/dining room. We have a front door that faces the road, but we hardly use it. Instead, we use the side door that enters into the dining room. When you come in the side door, the small kitchen is on the right, and the dining room table directly in front. Straight past the table is the hall leading to the living room, bathroom and bedrooms. The first doorway on the right of the hall is a short hallway to the front door and living room. On the left is the main bathroom. The second door on the right is my brother's old room, currently my dad's music room, and at the end of the hall is my parents' room and half bath, and off to the right of their doorway is a small offshoot to my room. We have an attic, but it's little more than a crawl space, and half of it is inaccessible. The other half is used for storing Christmas decorations. Now for the weirdness. When we first moved in, almost every night, I would hear what sounded like a group of people walking around on the roof, complete with heavy footsteps and the wood creaking with every step. It sounded like one or more people were slowly pacing back and forth. It was always directly over my room. My parents didn't believe me when I told them, saying it was squirrels or the wind, but I knew what I heard. We would go out for a family night every so often, usually out to eat, and then to somewhere like Walmart, which for me and my brother at that time was a big treat. Every time we went out, we would turn out all the lights in the house because my parents didn't want to waste electricity on an empty home. But whenever we got back, there was always one light on, either in the kitchen or the living room. Even then I was a bit sceptical and blamed my parents for leaving the lights on to try and scare us, because they were the ones who would always mention ghosts every time it happened, but they swore it wasn't them. My room seemed to be especially active. Even today, I feel like someone is looking over my shoulder or standing directly behind me when I'm on my computer. I would constantly have vivid, recurring dreams about waking up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. It would be pitch black and really quiet, which isn't unusual for our neighbourhood, but I would get out of bed and go down the hall to the bathroom. Nothing would seem out of the ordinary until I tried to turn on the bathroom light. Either the light would come on really dim or not at all. At first this would start making me nervous, as the darkness would feel heavy and oppressive, but before anything could happen I would wake up. Other times I would just get frustrated at the lack of light and even try to change the bulbs a few times before waking up. After a while it got to the point where, once I realised the light wasn't coming on, I knew I was dreaming and woke myself up. I've only had one really terrifying vivid dream when I was about 9. I remember the dream, but not the events after. In the dream I was on my bed, but it was floating on a sea of arms that were reaching up trying to grab me. They were all around my bed. My parents claimed that they had come in there because I was screaming and hitting the edge of my bed with a baseball bat, but I don't remember that part. I used to love rearranging my furniture every so often when I was a kid. One night after rearranging, I was laying on my bed, which I had moved to where I could sort of see out into the hall. I saw the shadow of a young boy move down the hall from my brother's room. Thinking it was him, I waited a few seconds and got up to check and possibly scare him, but when I got halfway down the hall, I realised nobody was there. There are some times, even to this day, that I don't like going down the hall late at night. As I got older, and after my brother moved out, the events just seemed to stop. Either that or I just wasn't paying much attention due to the usual young adult drama. After moving back in there have been a few incidents. One night in particular was pretty bad. Not long after I moved in, I bought an old large metal desk for a computer desk. A couple of nights after, I was trying to sleep, and something just felt off. I kept hearing the metal of the desk ping and pop like it was flexing, only to immediately have my dresser creak like the wood was settling, which it's never done before. This continued back and forth all night, from my desk to the dresser and back, and I didn't get any sleep until around 4 a.m. There were 2 other incidents that really made me pause for a good while and think about them. The first happened in January 2 years ago. My parents went up to Ohio for 2 weeks to see my mum's family, but I couldn't go because they sprung it on me last minute and I couldn't get time off work. My mum asked me if I would put the Christmas decorations back in the attic while they were gone. 2 days after they left, I decided to get it over with and pulled down the attic door and folded down the steps. After getting the first few boxes ready to go up, I turned to the steps, and right as I put my hand on the steps to start to climb, an image flashed through my mind. If you've ever seen the American version of the movie The Grudge, there's a scene where a girl peeks into the attic only to be grabbed by the spirit and killed. That entire scene went through my head instantly, and in full detail. I hadn't seen or even thought about that movie for years at the time, so having that thought that clear bothered me. It was enough to make me sit down in the living room for about half an hour, because my follow-up thought immediately after that scene was, this is how I die. Fortunately, the perks of being 6 foot is that afterwards I just stood on the bottom step and pushed the boxes up through the opening without ever having to stick my head up there. The other event happened a couple of months after. Even though I work night shift, I would typically stay up during the day and sleep at night on my days off. I woke up really early one morning, around 6:30, 7, and saw what looked like someone with a pale, white face, wearing all black, sitting in my computer chair beside my bed watching me. I jumped awake, only to find a pile of laundry in the chair, my black jacket hanging on the back, and my black hoodie with a round white logo hanging on the closet door behind it. I will admit that it was fairly dark, and I was half asleep at the time, but every time I run the layout through my head, none of it adds up. The hoodie with the white logo, which could have been the face, was partially blocked from my view by the computer tower at the angle I was laying. That and the fact that it was hanging too high for the logo to be where the person's head was. The back of the chair with the jacket on it was also too narrow and low down to be where the shoulders were. I've accepted my explanation as is, because it freaks me out too much to think of someone sitting in my computer chair while I'm asleep, since it's less than a foot away from the edge of my bed at all times. Those are all the experiences I can remember. I asked my mum not too long ago if she'd had any. She didn't tell me any of hers, but she did say that my dad has seen figures go up and down the hall late at night while he's sitting in the living room alone. Brisk Walker by Tweed. This is a peculiar series of events that involve a man who simply walks home. I'm not sure this person is a ghost, and don't really know what to think actually. When I was 10, we moved to a house where I first encountered the man. We moved there in late 1991, and Mum moved out in 2007. During that entire time, this guy walked past our house. There's nothing unusual in that. We saw him maybe once a week, a few times a week, once a month. It depends on if you were looking out the window at the right time. From this, we can deduce that he kept a routine. We always saw him in the afternoon and early evening. I never took note of the times, but between roughly 5 and 7 p.m. He always wore a black, or maybe it was charcoal, suit, white shirt, carried a briefcase, and I think he wore glasses. He was kind of short, maybe 5'4" or something. His hair was sandy blonde and thick. Also, he had a very brisk walk. He was quick, and his pace never seemed to alter. His consistent walking pace was the most distinguishing thing about him. The first off thing I noticed about the guy was on a hot summer day in about 1996. I was around 15 at the time, and it was early evening. I was mucking around with the budgie, saw him walk past and thought nothing of it. Moments later I realised how hot it was, and how he was wearing a full suit. I thought he was pretty dumb not to have taken his jacket off at least, and wondered how he could keep such a quick pace in the heat. We'd seen him walk in different locations around town, around his usual time, always on the same route. His route came from the station. The reason we noticed this is because our house was nowhere near the station, and there were bus routes to take you to our neighbourhood. There was no need to walk all that way. We figured he'd chosen to walk for the exercise, so when he walked past wearing a full suit on a 1,000,000-degree day, I was somewhat shocked. I can't remember what was going on, but late one night in about 1999, Mum and I were standing on the street a few doors up from our house looking at the stars. Mum's big on astronomy and often called me outside to check something out. However, we usually stargazed from the backyard or the driveway. Standing on the street was rare. So there we were at about 11 p.m, and there he was walking home late. From where we were standing, we saw him turn down a street off ours. Mum commented that after all these years, she never knew where he walked beyond the point of our place. She also voiced concern about him walking from the station so late, because yahoos hung around the station after dark. I thought about how we'd never seen him in any other context all these years. Apart from it being late, nothing seemed that strange. We continued to see him walk past our house at his usual time after this. About a year later, I was at the letterbox when he rounded our corner. This was the first and only time I saw him up close. Our letterbox was about 5 steps from the corner. I looked up and said hi or something as he passed. He replied hi or something back and glanced at me briefly. There was something bizarre about this moment. I couldn't put my finger on it, and I still can't. However, I was distracted by a fashion catalogue and didn't give any heed to the undercurrent. As he passed, I turned to go up the driveway, so I was directly behind him on the footpath. I looked up from the catalogue to where I was going, and he was gone. He should have been directly in front of me, because only a second had passed. I thought, where did he go? And these thoughts eventually turned to, where does he go? Our embankment was dense and steep. He couldn't have gone in there. Our neighbour's embankment was equally steep. The houses across the road had visible front yards. I don't know where someone could have hidden within seconds. Today, I still don't know what to make of that. Of all the brushes with the odd I've had, this ghost has always been hard to accept as a ghost. I don't know why that is, but I still feel the same today. Also of note, when he suddenly wasn't there, I didn't freak out or anything. I just looked around and thought, cool. I wonder if anyone else just saw that. Since that day, we continued to see him pass our house, as well as in various points around the route from the station to our neck of the woods. He always walked briskly, always wore the same attire. As the years went on, I became aware his fashion never changed, and he never aged. Oddly enough, I remember the first time I saw him quite vividly. It wasn't long after we'd moved in, way back in '91. I stopped whatever I was doing when I noticed some guy walk past our place, then continued to watch this person walk up the road. It was all pretty dull. Nevertheless, I remember that mundane moment quite well. Ever since the first time, I had these questions like, what is he doing? I guess this feeling is directly linked to the weirdness in the letterbox moment. Since the letterbox day prompted me to question if he was a ghost, more questions beckoned. What motive and why bother? Was he residual? And had I imagined he acknowledged me because I was distracted? If he was residual, surely he would have stopped traffic. There were many intersections on his route. Come to think of it, I never saw him cross any road. In fact, he always crossed the road at a certain point in front of our house, which was obscured by trees. We had a thick mini forest of lily-pillies up an embankment from the footpath. He must have crossed around this section of path, because every time he passed our place, he would be on the other side of the road by the time he'd passed our embankment and become visible further up the road from our windows once more. A few years before the letterbox moment, I saw him walk through the station car park, away from the station, but that's the closest I ever saw him to the place. On that day, a group of us, all teenagers, were hanging around outside the Masonic Lodge opposite the station. We were peering through the gates, making up conspiracy theories about what went on inside. Any excuse to talk about paranormal stuff. Amusingly, peering through the gates meant facing away from the station. In hindsight, this moment has a pantomime quality. He's behind you. His attire and early evening commute simply led us to assume he was walking home from the station, so noticing him walk through the car park in the direction of the rest of his route seemed normal. Also, I never saw him at any location before the station on his route. That doesn't really mean anything either, does it?
Hi guys, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you liked it, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also hit the notification bell. That way you'll know when the next video goes live. Next video is going to be another compilation special, though it's going to be one of my favourite subjects as a small birthday treat to myself. So, until next time, sleep tight.